In 1213 AD, Zhongdu was the most magnificent city on earth, a golden capital of 1 million souls. Its walls had never been broken. The Jin Dynasty had defended them for decades against every enemy. And then Genghis Khan arrived and did something no enemy had ever done before. He looked at those walls for a long time, and then he simply ordered his men to sit down. Every road was sealed, every river gate blocked, every supply route cut. Zhongdu was now a closed box. The Jin commanders understood immediately. This was not a siege. This was a sentence. Inside Zhongdu, life continued, but something had changed in the air, like the first cold breath before a blizzard. The Jin court was one of the most sophisticated civilizations on the planet. Art, poetry, science, silk. Its markets fed 1 million people. Every luxury, every necessity flowed through its streets in abundance. The imperial kitchens alone prepared enough food every day to feed a small town. The nobility lived in a world of tea ceremonies and poetry, as disconnected from war as it was possible to be. The granaries were full. But the moment the roads closed, not a single grain of new rice could enter. The military commanders did the calculation, and the number they arrived at was the most terrifying thing they had ever seen. At current consumption, the city had perhaps 18 months of stored food, and the Mongols showed no sign of moving. The rationing orders came 3 months into the siege, and Zhongdu learned what it meant to be hungry. The portions were small, the queues were long, and every week the portions got smaller. Even the wealthy felt it first as a discomfort. A smaller bowl, a missing dish, a meal that didn't satisfy. Within 6 months, the wealthy were trading their silk robes at the markets, but there was no food left to buy. First came the horses. The cavalry mounts that had made Jin armies feared were now slaughtered for their meat. The soldiers ate their battle rations, but garrison troops need feeding too, and the army was consuming what the civilians needed. Outside the walls, Mongol supply wagons moved freely. Genghis Khan fed his men well and made sure the city knew it. By the end of the first year, the markets sold things that were not food because food no longer existed. The nobility boiled their saddles, their belts, their shoes, anything made of leather that could soften enough to swallow. The palace physicians began to see diseases they had only read about, the ancient diseases of famine. The ornamental gardens were stripped, every tree bare of bark, every fish pond drained and emptied. The rats multiplied. And then the people of Zhongdu began to hunt them, fight over them, pay fortunes for them. Order began to crack when the soldiers stopped breaking up the fights, because the soldiers were hungry too. The emperor held court in robes that hung from his bones. The pageantry of power continued even as the empire hollowed out. The first soldiers deserted in the darkness. Surrender to the Mongols seemed better than death by degrees inside the walls. Some deserters were returned to the city by Mongol guards. It was more efficient to let them die inside the walls than to feed them. The moment the history books record next is one that no narrator should describe without pausing. It began with the dead. The starving ate the bodies of those who had already died, and then the calculus changed. Jin Dynasty chroniclers recorded what was happening. Their accounts are the most disturbing documents in Chinese history. The chroniclers wrote of houses stripped to bare stone, every object of value traded, burned for warmth, or consumed. The same hands that had held jade cups for poetry banquets now cupped empty air and waited for a ration that didn't come. The streets grew quiet, not with peace, but with the silence of a place where most of the living had already given up. By the second winter, the granaries were empty, completely, finally, irreversibly empty. The court still held its ceremonies, silk on bones, protocol over the void, the human need for order outlasting the capacity to sustain it. The chronicles record that human flesh was sold openly in the markets of Zhongdu, and that people paid for it. Genghis Khan did not fire a single arrow at the city, and yet he had destroyed everything inside it. By 1215, the city that had housed 1 million people had become something else entirely. The soldiers on the walls were still there, but they were dying standing up. The river district was silent. The docks where silk and spice had once unloaded now served only as resting places for the dead. In the imperial palace, officials gathered to discuss the word they had refused to say for 2 years: surrender. The emperor sat alone in a hall that had once held 1,000 officials. Now it held only silence. The last commander of Zhongdu's garrison walked the walls and counted what he had left, and it was nothing. He put his hand on the wall and stood there for a long time. And then he sent a messenger to the Mongol camp. The white flag crossed no man's land, and the city that had defied the Mongol Empire for 2 years surrendered. The gates of Zhongdu opened on a spring morning in 1215, and what they revealed silenced even the Mongol army. The Mongol advance riders stopped their horses at the gate. The smell hit them before they could see anything. The scouts entered on foot, veteran soldiers who had crossed half of Asia, now moving with visible dread. They walked into a city of bones. The streets were carpeted with the dead, so many that the soldiers could not walk without stepping between them. These were men who had conquered kingdoms, and they were visibly shaken by what they found. The imperial palace of the Jin Dynasty, once the most opulent building in Asia, stood open to the sky. A Mongol officer stood in the throne room of the Jin emperor, and he was standing in a tomb. The golden throne was still there, perfectly preserved in its own silence, waiting for an emperor who would never return. The treasure was still there, mountains of silk, jade, and gold, because treasure cannot be eaten. From the highest tower, a Mongol officer surveyed the city and estimated that he could see the bones of 100,000 people. Even the men who had come to loot found themselves walking quietly, out of something that felt, despite everything, like respect for the dead. Genghis Khan entered Zhongdu 3 days after his scouts, and he rode through it in silence. He had wanted the city destroyed without a battle, and it had been destroyed more completely than any battle could have managed. He had paid almost no price in Mongol lives, and yet the Jin Dynasty was absolutely finished. The Mongol banner rose above Zhongdu, and the Jin Dynasty, 3 centuries old, was erased from history. The Mongols took everything of value: the silks, the jade, the gold, and also the books, the maps, the scientific records. Within a week, Mongol soldiers were sleeping in the palaces of the Jin emperor, in rooms where Jin nobles had died of hunger. For Genghis Khan, Zhongdu was already the past. His eyes were already moving west, toward the next target. A handful of survivors remained, servants and scholars who had somehow endured, witnesses to both worlds. The Mongols cleared the streets, not out of respect for the dead, but because they needed room for the living. The palace was stripped to the beams. Everything that had not been consumed by the siege was taken by the conquerors. The skilled survivors, the physicians, the engineers, the astronomers, were taken west to serve the empire that had destroyed their city. The Mongols preserved what was useful: the knowledge, the art, the administrative expertise, even as they destroyed the world that produced it. Zhongdu was rebuilt as Dadu, the future Beijing, capital of a new Mongol dynasty over China. Archaeologists have found the physical evidence of the Starvation siege beneath modern Beijing's foundations, human bones in layers. Modern Beijing stands on the bones of Zhongdu. Every tower, every street, every foundation built over the dead of 1215. The chroniclers who survived wrote it all down because they understood that history must bear witness even to the worst of itself. Genghis Khan achieved his greatest conquest without firing a significant arrow, and historians have never stopped arguing about what to call that. His genius was patience, the understanding that a city cannot feed itself, and that time is the most efficient weapon ever invented. Military academies still study the siege of Zhongdu. It remains the defining example of what a blockade, given enough time, can accomplish. Genghis Khan called it strategy. His enemies called it extermination. What do you call it? And could any city today survive what Zhongdu endured? Tell us below, and subscribe, because the darkest chapters of history are only just beginning.